It's 20 minutes to 8. It's BBC Essex for this Tuesday evening. And it's time for me to welcome back an old mate who I used to meet via the BBC Essex Breakfast programme a few years back. Dan Woodruff is a financial planner from Colchester. He's with us now to help us a little bit with a bit of advice when it comes to, in particular, coronavirus. Dan, evening to you.
Good evening. We do
nice
get out of it, don't we?
We do. Dan, I've been looking at your website this evening, and I noticed that you're taking precautions. So you lot are working from home, and you're helping people work from home, and with sort of online meetings rather than face-to-face meetings. I suppose that's what we've got to get used to at the moment, isn't it?
Well, we're all doing our bit in our own way, aren't we? It's affecting us all in various ways. So I think as any business is doing at the moment, you have to first look after the safety of yourself and your colleagues, and then the clients that come to see you. But then, of course, you have to look at the financial health of the business going forward, don't you?
Yeah.
Which is obviously what we're going to talk about, I suppose.
Well, health is first, as you say, and and we've spoken to people before on BBC Essex saying, yes, they know they've got to earn money, but you have to put your health first, and you've got to follow the government advice, and that has meant a lot of people are, sadly losing work. Like we spoke to Poppy earlier in this hour, who is a wedding planner and is being laid off because there's no weddings to plan at the moment. And even, Darren, the fruit and veg market stall man, is seeing a huge drop in footfall. Again, you can understand people for not wanting to go to different places to do their shopping. They might be going to one supermarket to get everything they need and go home quickly. That's the advice. So it's very difficult. Have you seen a rise in people coming to you for financial help as a result of coronavirus, COVID-19?
Oh, we've been very busy, really sort of communicating with people about the wider effects of the lockdown, I suppose. So we tend to deal with people who have money invested, so clearly they've been affected by the stock market in particular. We try to disassociate the short-term issues of cash flow and liquidity in your own finances with the longer-term planning for the future and that kind of thing. So that's the kind of message we've been giving to people in general. In terms of the business people, I think they're the ones that have been hit the most. So the self-employed, obviously some employed in certain sectors who may have been laid off with their job. That's the biggest issue at the moment, isn't it? Those people whose income has really just been cut off, in one fell swoop. That's really causing some hardship for some people.
And we can talk about the self-employed section in just a moment, but regarding those who have, like Poppy, for example, lost their job at the moment, I suppose there's a difference between, we're hearing this word furloughed a lot, aren't we, at the moment? Can you just explain what that means, if you've been furloughed or if you've been, given your notice? Yeah,
I have to say the government is doing a lot to try and help us through these unusual measures. So one of the first things they did was to announce that they would provide businesses with a way to keep people on the books and not have to lay them off. You can imagine if you're running a pub or a restaurant and you're told to close that business, really you've got no income coming in. So one of the first things you're going to do to cut costs is to cut your staff and hopefully re-employ them when this is all over. Of course, what that means for those individuals is their income is immediately going to stop. Yes, they can apply for benefits, but that may take a while, and it certainly won't be as much as they're used to. So what the government announced was that those businesses could effectively get the government to pay those salaries up to 80% of their wages, up to £2,500 a month. So for many or most people, that will be a lifeline in these kind of situations. So effectively, what the government is asking the business to do is to carry on paying them, and they'll pay them back.
And do we know how long that will take? And can businesses afford to keep on paying if they're not getting money in whilst they wait for that subsidy to come back from the government?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, haven't you? Because I think the government's making it up as they go along, quite rightly, and they're throwing as much money as they can at this. But the problem is getting the money through to those businesses at the other end. So I think business owners are sitting there with some very difficult decisions to make. I think one of the first things they should have been doing would be to look at their budgets and say, okay, what do I need to do to keep this business afloat through this crisis? And of course, if they're worried that they can't necessarily keep on paying businesses, the employees for another month or so, then maybe they'll just cut their losses and say, I'm going to make people redundant anyway. Because, of course, even if you make somebody redundant straight away, then you immediately stop paying those wages, don't you? So it's a very difficult time, and I think the government really needs to do as much as it can to get that money flowing as quickly as possible.
So, yeah, this 80% scheme is if you've been furloughed, but Poppy has been told that her job's finished. You know, she's not got a job to go back to, if you like, when we're through this. For people like Poppy, the 80% scheme won't apply to her then.
I mean, it could possibly, if she was employed, then her employer could actually re-employ her after the fact and still kind of backdate the wages. So it is possible to do that even if someone has been laid off. So I would encourage her to talk to her former employer, because they may be able to, once the scheme gets up and running, kind of re-employ her and get some money going through to her, because it won't cost the business any more to do that. So it's worth having those conversations with people. And of course, there are some people who are sort of stuck between a pillar and a post. You know, those who've perhaps left one job and going to another job, they may find they're not having a job to go to as well. So really, all I can say to people in that situation is hopefully you've got savings. I mean, you know, that savings, the whole point of having an emergency fund is to see you through times like this, and those kind of savings will be tested for many people now. So if you don't have savings, then we're into more drastic measures, I suppose. And really what you need to do is look at your budget, in all honesty, and go through that very, very carefully to establish what's essential, you know. And I think you may be able to run down the list of the things that you normally spend money on. Happily, we're not able to go out of the house, so some of the sort of non-essential spending is going to go out the window for the time being.
Yep.
And for many people, that will be a useful way of cutting back. But then you really need to sort of approach your various suppliers, I suppose, and see if there's a way that you can stop paying those payments, or perhaps look at some of the other measures that have been talked about, you know, with things like loans and things like that. So.
And help for people renting, and also with mortgages, whether you rent your home or you pay a mortgage. I mean, it's worth speaking to, in both cases, the people you pay, because there are schemes in place as well to help in that area. Yeah,
I mean, the government has said that landlords are not able to evict people for the next 3 months, and I suspect that if this goes on longer, then that may be extended. Of course, that could be an issue for you if you are a landlord, by the way. But for the primary people who are worried about those in the rented sector, you know, I think the first thing to do is speak to your landlord, isn't it? And the same goes if you've got a mortgage or any other credit, to be honest with you, because lenders are being encouraged, and they are coming through on this, and they are offering people mortgage payment holidays and things like that. It doesn't necessarily just apply to mortgage. It could apply to your car loan, your credit card, and so on. So I think the most important thing is not to just stop making the payment, is actually to speak to your supplier, because there could be implications if you don't agree with them first. So one of the most important things, of course, with any kind of credit situation is your credit rating. So you wouldn't want to make a short-term issue now into a longer-term thing that could sit on your credit file for the next 6 years if you get into arrears without arranging that first.
Good tip. Hold there for a minute, Dan. We'll break for the travel news on BBC Essex, and then I just want to touch on people who are self-employed. We had Gordon, who got in touch with us earlier, who was a musician, worked in theatre. His work completely finished, so he's now delivering food for Asda. He's got himself a replacement job. But let's just talk about self-employed after this.
Travel news from BBC Essex.
Talking of difficult times, we're with Dan Woodruff at the moment. He is a financial planner based in Colchester, working from home at the moment. I don't know how you're going to get through at the end of the tax year, Dan, which of course is only a couple of weeks away. I mean, a very busy time for you anyway. How's all that going to work from home?
Oh, it's surprising. It's working surprisingly well. We've got a good team, and we've got good processes. So for us, actually, it's about being organised. We've actually started the project for tax year end and tax year beginning, which is important for us, because we like to get people to use their tax allowances as soon as possible rather than waiting to the end of the tax year. So we started preparing that in probably middle of February. So actually, for us, working from home hasn't made a massive difference, because nothing sits on our computers these days. It's all in the cloud. So basically, we just set up on another lounge table, that kind of thing, and off we go. So the only thing we don't really have is kind of ready available printers, and so we're adapted. I think is my promise. So I think a lot of business is working like that now, isn't it?
And you'll be doing a lot of chatting over the phone rather than face to face. Are you someone who will be in your jimmy jams, or will you dress for work even though you're at home?
Very, very proper. At least we're wearing a jumper. So.
Oh, okay. I'm pleased to hear that. Dan, let's just talk about people who are self-employed then, because there was a lot of concern initially. We heard the help for businesses and for the employed, but a lot of self-employed people said, what about us? Because all of a sudden, overnight, our industry, our work perhaps, be it hairdressers, taxi drivers, whatever, gone. Now, there has been a lot of guidance in the past few days. If people have missed that, just bring us up to speed on what it means for the self-employed at the moment.
Well, so I think they've tried to model it around the same scheme that's been announced for employees. So it's a bit more complicated because the self-employed sector is so diverse, and I think that's probably why it's taken so long to come up with the scheme as they've announced. But basically, they will cover 80% of profits up to £2,500 a month based on your profits for the last 3 tax years. So for a self-employed person, you have to have had a tax return in for them to base the calculation around. It's kind of don't call us, we'll call you. So HMRC apparently are going to be in touch with the self-employed to at some point between now and June, and this is the problem with the scheme really, is that those self-employed people are really going to have to rely on their own resources until that date. So it's not like the furlough scheme for the employed where the employer could keep that money moving for them. The self-employed effectively going to be contacted and, I suppose, to sort of have some money paid into their account when that calculation is done.
But that could be June, and here we are at end of March. I mean, there's a lot of mortgage payments or rent or bills to pay between now and June, isn't there?
Yeah, I think to be fair to the government, it's a very complex calculation for them to do in a very short period of time. So I think that they are doing their best, but of course that's no comfort to anybody in that situation. And it goes back to the same point I made before, really. Hopefully people have got some savings that they can rely on. And I think for the self-employed, maybe if you haven't had savings, I think this is a wake up for the next time this may happen, because really what you need to do is you're in a more precarious situation when you're self-employed, aren't you? Because your income can stop at any stage. So really you need to be putting money aside for emergencies. Now, it may be that some self-employed, I mean, if you're, I think the case you mentioned, their income is stopped immediately. But for some, they may still have some money coming through the system for the next few weeks or months, but that won't be the case for many, will it? So you've got to be resourceful, I suppose. And your caller was typically that, wasn't he? He's got to have another job. So that there are opportunities out there. Of course, there'll be many people chasing those opportunities, but there are certain sectors. I mean, food is one, isn't it? Where people, they do need people to do deliveries and stack the shelves. So it might be needs must for the short term, I suppose.
I've had a note in a message from Steve in Colchester. I don't know whether you're going to be able to help with this, whether it's more of a tax thing or not, but Steve wonders whether the IR35 system, and forgive me for getting a bit technical, but that is when the employer or the person that you're doing your self-employed work for effectively stops the tax and the national insurance at source. So you're kind of like an employed self-employed person, if you like. Steve wonders whether being IR35 will rule you out of this self-employed help that the government announced the other day.
That's a very tricky technical issue, and I'm not sure they've thought that one through. So basically, there are a number of self-employed people who are now going to be kind of taxed as if they are employees. So they may have worked as a consultant for many years, perhaps in an IT role. I suspect they'll probably get caught up by the self-employed part of it. I can't imagine it would be fair to rule them out of both schemes. They're technically not employees, I don't believe, at this stage, unless they're the company they've been doing the work for has kind of given them a contract of employment and taken them on the books, which I doubt they have in that situation. So,
right. So although they may be considered pay-as-you-earn, they're probably legally still considered self-employed.
I suspect so. I mean, I think they would need to speak to their accountant about that one, and quite quickly. Yeah.
A lot of people are obviously worried, Dan. But just a bit of advice to finish our conversation this evening. The first few things you should do if you have concerns.
Well, I think the most important thing with any financial situation is to start at the beginning and really work out what's coming in and what's going out. You need to look at your income versus your expenses, put together a list, and of course, unfortunately at the moment the income may be zero, but you may have other sources that you can top that up from. So it may be savings, you may have some money put away for sort of longer term, and you may have to dip into that short term. Of course, that's not the ideal for the moment, but really to run down the list, look at it calmly, perhaps with a member of the family or somebody else, so you can look at it together and make some hard decisions. Now, don't make quick decisions, sleep on it, look at where your finances are going, but make sure that you speak to the various suppliers if you're going to cancel things, because you may have committed yourself for 12 months or something like that. So I think many bigger suppliers are probably going to be sympathetic in the current environment if you explain your predicament and say, basically, I can't pay. So I think they will probably give you some latitude, certainly on the credit side, but I think you need to speak to them first.
Dan, a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for your help and advice tonight. Dan Woodruff is a financial planner from Woodruff Financial Planning in Colchester.